none of us know how to use Zoom. So we are going to move on to the lovely Mr. Tim Webb. Tim, let me spotlight you.
Maybe if I talk, I might come center of your screen.
There you go. Add you on. There you are. Good evening.
Great.
My What's Brewing savior. So,
I'm just so grateful to you for taking 250 copies of old What's Brewings out of my bin. It was just so good of you.
Well, I will explain that to everyone shortly. So Tim is a former NE member and GBBF organizer, co-author of the World Atlas of Beer and the Good Beer Guide Belgium. I think you told me you accidentally became the godfather of Belgian beer, but totally.
Well, not the godfather. I think Michael Jackson was the godfather, but they do say in Belgium that it's the Brits that saved Belgian beer with a little bit of help from the Americans. And it was only about 5 years ago that Belgians actually started drinking Belgian beer, but we were ahead of the game.
So Tim, we chatted relatively early on in my research, and then, as I say, you donated 40 years worth of What's Brewing and beer magazines to me just after lockdown began, as I recall, which turned out to be pretty much the only primary sources that I had to work from, because every archive that I wanted to access was closed and still remains closed to this day. So things that I really should have seen, I've never seen, like the 1973 Sunday Times article that Ian Nairn wrote. I've never actually seen it. I know all about it. I know I've got the date it was printed, but I've never seen it. So it's really bizarre. But you absolutely were a savior in that regard for this book. And when we chatted, I really loved the story that you told me about driving around Herefordshire, collecting potential entries for the Good Beer Guide, because there was no branch in the area. And of course, people forget we've got 220 branches around the country now. But originally, they started off few and far between, and some areas were really, really sparse for real ale, and some areas there was just no one to talk about where real ale was being served. So as someone who joined CAMRA in that early kind of period, the same year that the first printed Good Beer Guide was released, 74, why do you think that the Good Beer Guide is so important? Oh, you're muted.
Right. Yeah, sorry, I must have re-muted myself. I think when it came out, it was something really very new. There had been pub guides, but they tended to be things that said, oh, well, so-and-so was terribly famous, and now they run a pub. And it didn't tell you anything about actually using the pub or whether it was any good. Good Beer Guide was quite a ridiculous book when it first came out, because all it told you about was the beer. And it happened to drag you around the country, going to all sorts of different pubs that had nothing in common other than the beer. So at that point, I was still a student, and I was led into the world of pubs by GBG. However, I've always been a natural traveler, and I realized there were certain parts of the country. In fact, the very first time I used GBG in 1974, and I went to Devon, and I realized it was quite an approximate guide. And I've actually still got my Good Beer Guide. I discovered it 10 minutes ago. And I've actually, and you had to go around scratching out the ones that no longer did traditional beer because they decided to give up on it. Oh, sorry, I forgot. In the very first one, you had to work out what the logic of the editor was as to where the counties should come. It's a sort of snake-like trip around Britain. And you can still see it on here. I was scrubbing out all the ones that are closed, quite a few. I was scribbling in my new ones. I was writing off to this address in St Albans and just saying, this is fantastic pubs. And lo and behold, in 1975, several of them appeared. Now, okay, that was the old days. By the time I got to the Midlands in the 1980s, Herefordshire still doesn't have a branch. Herefordshire is awash with great pubs. So you had to go out there and find them. And this pioneering spirit it's not a thing of the ancient past, because I carried on doing this in the Highlands and Islands about 15 years ago, because it's this massive area. And the branches, for all trying as best they could, didn't know what was going on. I was stupid enough to take holidays there, and I would come across places that still sent stuff in. And it was this brilliant consumer feedback concept of a pub guide that didn't really rely on either advertising, which is the death of any independent information, or relying on people promoting their pub in a clever way by getting other people to do it. So it was a fabulous idea. I love the GBG. It just struck me as an idea of its times. It was independent. Should come out again now, really.
That's the really interesting thing about CAMRA generally. I think I think it's become so successful, and its voice is so respected by government and internationally as well through the EBCU, is because it's an independent consumer voice. There's no commercial backing at all to the organisation. I think that's really important. What do you think about that?
I've always said CAMRA doesn't quite understand what it did. It keeps rabbiting on about saving cask ale, which, okay, was fine. Yeah, you did that. And that was quite important. But compared to the rest of it, it's not really very high up the ladder. It was the first consumer group that focused on one issue, which was trying to allow decent beer to survive in a world where mundanity was being marketed really hard. And the great thing about it is it actually shifted things. And I now write books about beer around the world, and I until lockdown, I would be flipping around the world. I could actually get people to pay me to go and speak in places, and I would have a fun, excellent life before lockdown. And what you realize is that what we started off in CAMRA was one of the foundation stones to a change in how beer is drunk around the world, and a change in how beer is appreciated around the world, that is now worth retail value something like 400 billion quid's worth of beer per year. And it is an astonishing achievement. And that's amazing. The fact we saved cask is quite good as well. The fact we did something, well, I don't know whether we did save the pub, actually. I think we've sadly had to watch the pub fade away, but what we did in beer was amazing.
And I think when I interviewed Nick Antona about where CAMRA is right now, he was really kind of focused on saying to me, CAMRA is about saving the pub at the moment. This is where we are right now. And we have seen different phases, because when it first came around, the idea that pubs were under threat would have just been laughable. It wasn't part of CAMRA's campaigning, because no one knew it was an issue.
No, I came across some data the last 6 months or so, which is quite horrific. Back in 1980, which is the last time I can remember being young, back in 1980, the average pub sold about 2,500 pints a week, and there were something like 75,000 pubs. And of the beer sold in Britain, 85–90% of beer was sold in pubs. And had 2020 happened as normal, then probably about 45% of the beer made in Britain will be sold in pubs. The average pub will be selling 1,400 pints a week, and there are only half as many of them. And it's an absolutely devastating thing has happened to beer overall. So I think CAMRA's forced to defend the pub, but if I look from the outside, yeah, okay, fine, please do it. But I think actually we don't defend the pub. We renovate the pub. We restart the pub. We kickstart the pub. We make micro pubs. We ask for every community in Britain with a population of more than 500 people to have the right to recreate a pub. That, I think, is where we should be going. And if we were any other organization, I'd say, oh, people quite rightly say, oh, that's pie in the sky. We've done some big things before now, and I think if we come up with the right idea and we push it, our great appeal is that we talk to ordinary people and we say things that appeal to people and people think are right. And I have a feeling post-COVID, that's going to be quite a powerful thing.
That's fantastic, Tim. That sounds like a great place to stop. That's a really important message, and I'm really pleased that you came to share that with us tonight. Thanks for chatting with me.
Cheers.
Cheers.